Last time on Getting Into Devil May Cry.
Every game gets better. Every game gets better. Every game gets better.
Devil May Cry 2. The video game industry is no stranger to bad games coasting on waves of hype. Whether it be excitement over a spiritual successor to a, at the time, long-dead franchise, an exciting new idea that could potentially shake up procedural generation, or a new addition to a beloved generation-spanning series, it's a sad fact that hype and brand recognition are a powerful combo that usually allows a mediocre product to stumble into moderate financial success at the least. Devil May Cry 2 is no exception. Most people familiar with the series are probably wondering why I'm even bothering to talk about this game, but contrary to popular belief, this game does have some merits worth discussion. I do want to be clear before we start though that this is, make no mistake, very easily the worst game in the series by a country mile, and I would go so far as to say that you shouldn't even bother finishing it unless you're extremely dedicated to having played the whole series. But if you've done your homework since my DMC1 video and got yourself a copy of the HD collection, you're already the proud owner of Devil May Cry 2, so you may as well pop it in to play the first 20 minutes or so, just to see, just so you know. But this of course brings us back to the question of why I'm bothering to talk about the game at all if I don't think it's worth playing. Well, for one, I already played the game, so I'm not letting those hours of my life go to waste, but more importantly, if the fan theories hold water over the next few months, it looks as if Devil May Cry 5 might be taking place post-Devil May Cry 2, which, for newcomers, is narratively the last game in the timeline of the main series. For this reason, it may unfortunately be helpful to know what happened in this game to be up to speed for the 5th game. To that end, much like our Lord and Savior Jesus Christmas, I've suffered for all your sakes and refreshed myself on this game so that I can break my general rule and offer some story spoilers in the hopes that you can safely skip this game and still be ready for DMC5. So let's get through this. We've got a lot to discuss as I reluctantly help you get into. So a little history before we get into the meat of all this. A question I imagine a lot of you may be asking is, why is Devil May Cry 2 so bad? How did it end up that way when DMC1 was so well received despite its flaws? Well, there are a couple reasons for that, all mixed together to make a disastrous shit slurry of game development woes. The two biggest blows to this game's chances were its team and time. As you'll remember from the last video, DMC1 came out at the tail end of summer of 2001. DMC2 came out in January of 2003. For those of you keeping score at home, that's barely a year and a half of development. Now, of course, it's possible to make a good game in only a year and a half, provided you have a good team and nothing major goes wrong. As you can probably guess, though, that didn't happen here. The second major red flag in this game's development is the fact that pretty much nobody who worked on the first game was involved. Little Devils wasn't so much taken off the development as they were never put on it to begin with. Hideki Kamiya apparently didn't even know that there was a sequel being made until one of the developers from the new team asked him for the dev documents while they were localizing DMC1 for the West. A slap in the face that, from interviews, he seemed to have bared pretty gracefully despite being disappointed with the decision. Instead, DMC2 was directed by... well, nobody really knows. Everywhere I looked, all I could find was unnamed director, which is just the seal of quality if I've ever seen one. Unnamed Son, whoever he was, evidently was leading the development into the dirt, and Capcom called in their clinch hitter Hideaki Itsuno, who longtime fans will be familiar with as the directors of DMC 3 and 4, and newer fans may know from
DMC is back!
So he was definitely the right guy to switch in. Unfortunately, it was too little too late, and he was only in charge for the last 4 months before the game shipped. But if I had to bet money, I would say him taking over the project is the reason DMC2 even runs at all. All that said, Devil May Cry 2 was, despite shifts in dev teams, rush timetables, and messy development resulting in a swap of directors, at least commercially a success, largely due to all the hype I mentioned earlier. The more things change, the more they stay the same indeed. It ended up pushing over 1 million units and, miraculously, secured the future of the series. The most painful part about all of it, though, is that with maybe an extra year, or even 6 months in the oven, it probably could have ended up being a much better game. There was a decent addition to the series to be salvaged somewhere in this game. There were some cool ideas, and the developers apparently really wanted to make a bigger and better Devil May Cry. It just never got that far. But this is the game we have, so let's talk about it. To get some minor things out of the way first, the graphics are fine, though not much of a leap over DMC1, and the music, while not as memorable as the last game's OST, has a couple tracks that stand out. Unfortunately, most of the soundtrack just kinda bounces off you. It's not bad, it's just not as good. Despite the game's horrible reputation, there's nothing offensive about these aspects of its presentation, and they're totally serviceable. Now, Devil May Cry 2's story is bad. The first game's plot was no great work of art, but it was fun. It had energy, it had personality, it had characters with defining traits, and dialogue that wasn't as bland as a toast sandwich.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
Nobody was expecting the sequel to be fucking Hamlet, but what it ended up being was below even its predecessor's bar, mainly due to a radical tone shift and some questionable structure choices. You'll remember from the last video that I described DMC1 as a playable B-movie. It was a campy romp through a classic cursed castle. Dante was an overly dramatic protagonist with some goofy but memorable lines, and the whole thing just emanated with a passion for the project. Devil May Cry 2 does away with all that and takes Dante to the opposing extreme. Instead of being cocky and quick-witted, he's stoic and barely says anything at all, and what dialogue he does have is read with all the enthusiasm of Ben Stein.
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
Whatever. That's just a piece of crap.
If you remember the intro from DMC1, as awkwardly crammed with exposition as it was, it at least gave us a clear idea of what the game was going to be about right away. Characters were established, tone was set, the dialogue wasn't great, but it had charm, and it was at least trying to inject some identity into what was happening. Devil May Cry 2 kicks off with significantly less everything. Less dialogue, less story, less character. We get a voiceover recap of who Sparta is and allusions to the event of the last game as the camera introduces us to the game's co-star, Lucia. She's this game's stand-in for Trish, who's off doing whatever you'd like to believe she's doing, since she doesn't appear, canonically, anywhere in this game. Which is probably a good thing, since the narrative strains under the weight of what few characters it already has. Lucia is, like most things in this game, the forgotten waifu of the DMC series, which is a shame because her design is pretty good, definitely more practical than Trish's outfit, and her voice has a cool French accent to it that's admittedly easy on the ears, and she seems really familiar now that I think of it. Where have I
am Mistral, the cold wind of France.
Oh. Huh. Even when Camilla's not around, Camilla's still around. Anyway, she's here in this museum in scenic Who Cares City to steal this little coin when demons bust into attack. While this scene doesn't end up communicating too much, it does show us that Lucia is plenty tough in a fight, and much like Trish, shouldn't be underestimated. As more demons appear and begin to make off with the coin, our boy Dante makes a decent entrance.
Dante.
It's implied that he's been hired for a job by Lucia, but what job exactly is left hanging in the air, and her only clue is to leave one of her knives in the map behind him. Already you can tell that, like I mentioned, Dante is a pretty different guy than when we saw him last. He barely says a word the entire scene, and he's much more down to business. This will be a trend going forward, and it's indicative of the problem I would imagine most other people have with this game. When I said no one was expecting Hamlet out of it, what I meant was that DMC1 had an objectively kind of shitty story too, but it was fun, so you didn't really care all that much. You were entertained. DMC2 is not fun, so there's nothing to distract you from how bad everything is, and part of the problem is the toned down characters. Dante's cocky action hero attitude was the centerpiece of the first game, but in DMC2 you could replace him with cardboard.
Whatever.
To sum it up, when I was in college getting my worthless literature degree, one of my professors gave me a piece of writing advice. Good characters save bad stories, but good stories rarely save bad characters. Basically, if you don't give a shit about the characters, then the rest of the work is already crippled, no matter how good it might be. Anyway, I don't want to get hung up on just the intro. From this scene, we jump to the first mission, with Dante standing atop a clock tower and leaping down, which leads us into gameplay, and this is where the trouble really starts. Plain and simple, DMC2 feels slow. You don't move quite as fast, the animations aren't quite as snappy or impactful, it just doesn't feel as good to move or attack as it did in DMC1. To give you an example, observe the DMC1 stinger. Now observe the DMC2 stinger. I rest my case. Not that you'll need the swords at all if you're just playing the game out of curiosity. The ranged weapons in this game are far more powerful than any other Devil May Cry title, which is bad for two reasons. The first reason is that it just plain trivializes the game. You don't ever have to get close to any threat, so you're not likely to take much damage. The second reason is that it makes the game harder if you actually care about landing combos and building style points. Because they do so much damage, and because the auto-targeting is so damn aggressive, you might end up accidentally killing the thing you're trying to get close enough to attack properly. One thing the game does that I did find convenient was that there was a dedicated dodge button. But the problem there is that it's faster to roll than it is to run, so for the whole game you're better off just... It also allows you to wall run in a bunch of different ways depending on your angle, which looks pretty cool and is definitely in line with the stylish aspect of the series, but unfortunately it's not particularly useful, although every so often you might luck into a cool looking attack. Another cool thing it introduces is the ability to actually air combo. When you do your launcher, you can follow up with some aerial kicks before doing your helm splitter. This is yet another mechanic that, while I appreciate the attempt and on paper is a good idea, it's not the most intuitive attack, and it's easy to do on accident when you're trying to go for your helm splitter. All that is rough, but it's not the real deal breaker. It wasn't until the end of this mission that I remembered probably the worst part about this game: the shop. So, eagle-eyed viewers, who can tell me what's wrong with this screen? If you guessed where the move's at, you would be right. Where the move's at? Not in Devil May Cry 2, that's for sure. There are no purchasable moves in this game. Your default moveset is the moveset you will have from the first mission to the last. Instead of new moves, the game gives you the ability to upgrade your swords and guns, which you might think maybe, just maybe, upgrading the weapons would unlock new moves. No. All it does is increase your damage, which... why? Why would you even need that? You already do so much damage. So then we have the shop where we have this going on. Look, I know Devil May Cry is a difficult series, but if you need 30 vital stars to get through the game, you're probably playing this game smashed and need to lay off the hooch. The amount of items you can carry is absolutely bananas. I cannot fathom carrying that many items. The only worthwhile purchases to be had are the blue and purple orbs. While I'm on the subject, blue orb fragments also make a return. Same rules apply, grab 4 you get to earn an orb. You can find them scattered around the game and secret rooms, which are basically DMC1 secret missions but without any special objectives. Just kill whatever's in the room for a fragment. Another comeback is mission rankings, and while it's nice to have a more thorough breakdown of how the game is calculating your score, it mostly doesn't matter, because it's pitifully easy to get through missions under the par time without using items, and you can practically avoid taking any damage at all if you just stick to ranged combat. Combos, as mentioned, can be annoying to consistently land due to your high damage output, and since it's ranked on an average, even if you do get plenty of S ranks, which I did, even a few D ranks, which you're sure to get plenty of, will tank your score. There's more to dig into, but that's pretty much all you'll encounter on the first mission, so let's go back to the story and stick a pin in the gameplay for a moment. So, after the first mission, Dante meets back up with Lucia at her mom's house, which inexplicably explodes. I think it was struck by a missile, or maybe there was a planted bomb, it's unclear. Not like it really matters, though. Granny just waltzes out of her basement and starts expositing.
They really made a big mess, didn't they? Sure took him a while to find this place. Oh, you have arrived, son of Sparta.
You knew him?
Oh, yes. We are the guardians of this land, Vidumali. Our clan once fought against the demons with Sparta, son of Sparta. We must ask this favor of you. You see, there's a man who's transformed our land into a demon's paradise. His name is Arius. And although he is the president of an international public corporation, he uses the demon power. Please, deal with Arius and his master for us.
Looks like it's your lucky day.
Wonderful! I am very pleased.
So now we finally know why we're here and what we're doing. In the first game, it was a fight against the Devil May Cry universe's equivalent of Satan, and in DMC2, we tackle an even greater evil.
Capitalism!
Specifically, the evil billionaire Jeff Bezos, I mean Arius, and his Ouroboros Corporation. Dante flips a coin to decide whether or not to help, the closest thing he has to a character trait in this game, and luckily for them, it lands on head, so he's on board. Despite the fact that he was allegedly already hired for the job, and he took the time to come out to this island. Look, this game is stupid, and it's revealed at the end that the coin has heads on both sides, so the coin flipping thing is rendered moot anyway, but a first-time player wouldn't know that, so this scene still makes no sense. Moving on, Dante is sent off to assassinate a presumably famous corporate billionaire, so what does Lucia do? Well, from a new player's perspective, not much more than Trish did in the first game. She barely appears in the story except for seemingly randomly showing up at the end or beginning of some missions, but there is more going on with her than is immediately apparent. When I said that I beat this game, technically that wasn't true. I actually beat the game twice, because there are two story modes, Dante's and Lucia's, and this is where that part about the story being structured weirdly comes back around. So in the original PS2 release, the game was split into two discs. Disc 1 was Dante, and Disc 2 was Lucia. In the HD collection, you can select which story to play from the main menu, simulating choosing between the two discs. Before anything, I do want it on the record that I think being able to play as Lucia is a cool addition to the game, but unfortunately the way it's done makes the story even harder to follow. Unlike in, say, DMC4, where the switching of perspectives from Nero to Dante and then back to Nero are done so that the story is relatively in chronological order and you haven't missed anything, Dante and Lucia's story happen simultaneously, meaning that when you play as Dante, Lucia is off doing something you don't see, and vice versa. This wouldn't be such a problem if Lucia's story was just a bonus, or maybe a mode that gave slightly more context to what was happening, but in actuality there are some pretty major story beats that happen in Lucia's mode that make Dante's story seem like you missed something, because you did. Having played both, I can tell that there are some cuts where were you willing to go through the trouble of switching from one disc to the other, you could meld it into one cohesive narrative, but even if you were that level of masochist, if you weren't already familiar with the story, you wouldn't know when to switch between discs, because Lucia has 5 less missions than Dante, so it's not a one-to-one back and forth. Granted, even if the plot wasn't scattered between two characters, it still wouldn't be very good or interesting, but the disorganization just makes it seem all that much worse. So what's Lucia actually doing? She's looking for these MacGuffins called Arcanas that Elon Musk Arius is after to perform a demonic ritual with. The coin from the beginning of the game is one, along with Granny's staff, and you spend her first mission getting another from the clock tower that Dante jumped off from his initial mission. I could harp about how they should have probably bumped into each other at some point rather than back at the house, but I won't. We don't have that kind of time. We still have to make like the game and get back to the gameplay. I've gone over the basics already, but there's still some details to go over. So DMC1 was very obviously borrowing from Resident Evil's gameplay flow of exploration in order to find key items or outwitting minor puzzles to proceed, with combat as a fun obstacle along the way from point A to point B. DMC2, while having overall larger environments and a greater variety of locales, has significantly less engaging puzzles. There are still key items to collect, still a few simple puzzles, but unlike the last game, most of them just bounce right off you. They feel less involved, more divorced from the flow of gameplay. The combat will stick out in your mind much more than any of the game's puzzles will, which wouldn't be a problem if the combat was better. The game now feels like nothing but fighting in order to get to the next fight, so that eventually you either reach the end or you fight a boss. And as we've established, the combat isn't even as rewarding as the last game, so the thing that it's now relying on even more is more disappointing. DMC2 is technically larger, it has more locations, more missions, and bigger environments, but it sacrifices that intimacy and careful construction that helped give the first game its charm, and I think they gave up more than they got. One of the things that could have saved the combat somewhat would have been an expanded roster of weapons, but they don't even do that. Devil May Cry 1's weapon selection was by no means mind-blowing, but at least they tried to do something different with Ifrit. In DMC2, they don't even bother. Every weapon is a sword, or in Lucia's case an arm blade, that works identically, so it's really just a cosmetic choice. The guns have more intricacies than the melee weapons, which is depressing. See, DMC2 brings in yet another feature that will become standard going forward, which is active weapon switching, that is, switching weapons fast enough to feasibly mix up attacks mid-combo, but only allows you to do it with the guns, because the melee weapons all work the same, so there's no reason to switch. Double Trigger is back as well, though they're not tied to the weapon you have equipped anymore, and are instead linked to a series of gems you gather as you play, which does allow you some freedom to mix and match your powers since there's elemental damage and different abilities that you can equip to change things up, but it doesn't really matter too much beyond some areas requiring flight. Devil Trigger of any kind will pretty much melt right through even the bosses, and since the DT meter is one of the 2 things in this game that's worth upgrading, you'll soon have more meter than you know what to do with. As if that wasn't enough though, if you get low on health and activate your DT, you'll enter what's called the Majin form. This is a super Devil Trigger that will instantly refill a huge chunk of your life bar and does ridiculous damage. This is all to say that unless you go out of your way to, play the game like you played the first one, you won't be dying all that much. The only real threats in this game are the bosses, which, much like everything else in this game, are a mixed bag. The variety and number of encounters is increased from the first game, and they range from the dumbest shit I've ever seen to fucking annoying, to serviceable, to actually pretty cool looking. That said, none of the bosses really leave as much of an impact on you as the bosses from the last game, because you don't spend as much time dealing with them, and most of them don't even have dialogue to bounce off Dante or Lucia. So they're really just oversized obstacles for you to surmount. I mean, hell, even Phantom was a better boss than— Oh, hey, Phantom!
I clapped when I saw it!
About the only boss you do fight more than once is Tim Cook. Arius. Who is, well, he's about as tough as you'd imagine a corporate executive to be, magic powers or no. Don't get me wrong, the fights are lame, but I actually do like the tone, since his gimmick is that he's usually just sitting on the sidelines sipping wine and taking potshots at you with a gun, while a swarm of summoned ads do most of the actual fighting. A fitting allegory for the blood of the working class greasing the gears of the capitalist machine as the unfeeling bourgeoisie look on from their— In the original version of this script, I went through an abridged breakdown of the rest of the game's story because this game isn't very fun and I didn't want you guys to feel like you were missing anything. However, I decided to cut this section of the video down vastly for a few reasons. The first being that there's only a few other details we haven't covered in the story that could possibly be relevant in the future, so I'm not going to bore you with the rest, because 2, the story is dumb and bad and doesn't even do us the courtesy of being entertaining. 3, as I've mentioned in my first video, these games are old and if you really want to find out what happens, you can easily just watch all the cutscenes right here on YouTube. And finally 4, the whole section was like 10 minutes and just made the video drag, and it really wasn't what this video was supposed to be about anyway, so I'll just get straight to the shit you actually need to know and leave the rest to your discretion. So launching forward to the tail end of the game, basically Arius' plan boils down to using the Arcanas to open a portal to Hell and summon a demon called Argisax the Chaos so he can become an all-powerful being or whatever. He never shuts up about it, really. He manages to pull it off and a demon space laser explodes into a black hole, a sentence way too cool for this game, ripping open a portal to the demon realm. Dante decides to go in and fight Argisax while Lucia deals with a supernaturally roided out Arius. Unsurprisingly, they both win and the day is saved. Unfortunately, Dante is screwed because with Argisax and Arius dead, the portal collapses and he's stuck in hell now. Deciding to just go for broke, he rides his motorcycle he inexplicably has with him off into the sunset? That's where the story ends. Though, if you sit through the credits, there is a stinger where Lucia is in the Devil May Cry shop that players of DMC1 will recognize from the intro of the first game. As she laments over Dante, a revving motorcycle can be heard outside the shop, and she runs off to see who it is. Now do you see why people think DMC5 will be post-DMC2? Is it a stretch of a theory? Yeah, but given Dante's aged appearance, it's not impossible, especially since DMC2 is the last game in the timeline. I'd rather be safe and have you guys up to speed on what happened here and DMC5 be about something completely different than not bother and then have you guys be confused because everyone understandably ignores this game. That said, if you really want to put the time in, I'll list off a few warnings and heads-ups to hopefully make this experience more bearable. Like I've said, the most efficient way to play this game if all you care about is your score and progressing quickly is to just blast everything that moves with your guns and not bother too much with the melee combat. That said, if you want to extract any kind of fun out of this game, you'll resist the temptation. It's still not great, but there's at least more going on than mashing the shoot button. Getting decent combos going once you get out of the habit of relying on your guns too much for filler and have either a sizable group of enemies around you or a few chunkier ones isn't too hard really, it's just you probably won't be getting as many A's or S ranks as you will D or C ranks, and remember this game uses averages. The dodge mechanic actually acts as a combo extender the same way that your guns do, so if you swap between them, taking only short, sparse bursts with your guns, you'll be able to mitigate accidentally killing the things that you want to swing at too early. As I mentioned offhand earlier, the auto-locking in this game that's meant to help you attack accurately is so aggressive that it will force you to attack whatever it's decided you should be attacking, even if you have a target you prefer. I think it's based on proximity, but honestly I couldn't quite figure it out. This makes precise targeting, such as activating switches, extremely difficult. Devil May Cry 1 had this problem as well, but here it seems exponentially worse. So if there are any enemies around them, it is all but impossible to trigger them until you've cleared everything else out, which is aggravating to say the least. You can sometimes position yourself such that you end up attacking in the appropriate direction, but it's easier to just kill everything. Nothing wastes time like trying to save time, as they say. Platforming also makes a comeback, but unfortunately the invisible walls don't, so the trick from DMC1 of running against the barriers to line up your trajectory doesn't work anymore. You do have air hike right from the start this time around, so there is some opportunity to correct yourself if you fuck up, but more often than not, it just sends you hurtling too far on the other direction. The map is also not much help either, since unlike in DMC1 where you had a multi-level map that showed you where you were and where you needed to be going, DMC2's map is, lacking, shall we say. It still gives you a general idea of where you are, but there's no objective marker to help you, and you can't move or rotate it like you could in the last game. There were a few instances where I was just totally lost as to where progression was. Now, I could just be stupid. It's entirely possible. But just in case I'm not, and these are just legitimately poorly placed, I'll give you a quick guide now. Probably the worst was the hangar during the power plant missions for both Dante and Lucia. When Lucia goes there, since she's chronologically the first to get there, after entering into the plane where you get the practically useless proximity bombs, there's a door way in the back corner of the hangar that I just never thought to even look for that contains the item you need to keep going. In Dante's portion, after you get the rocket launcher from the same plane, you'll notice it crashed into the wall. It may not look it, but there's an opening around the plane's nose that you're meant to progress through. Speaking of the power plant, during the mission where you're on a timer to escape after meeting Arius for the first time, don't bother stopping to fight the enemies in this tunnel, they spawn infinitely. Their only purpose is to farm red orbs. Moving closer to the end of the game, there's a mission that's basically hide and seek with a bunch of switches surrounded by clusters of enemies in the largest area of the game, and you have to do it with both Dante and Lucia. Lucia's isn't quite as bad because most of the switches are closer to the ground level, but Dante's are a bit more out of the way due to making better use of the verticality of the stage, especially this one sitting on top of a fucking house. As I've mentioned already, the auto-lock will make hitting these things, especially the ones floating in the air, basically impossible unless you've already cleared out every living thing in sight. There's that switch, one down the alley directly to your left after starting the mission, one down the end of the street you're facing after starting the mission, and the last one is back where at the beginning of the game you had a minor arena battle for a key. You also find a new devil trigger there too. Once you get all of them, head back to that alley where you found one of the levers and head through the door there so you can trigger Phantom shooting out of a starfish anus. There's also a portion near the end of the game as you're making your way up to Arius for the second time with Dante. Now, if you were to keep your eye on the map, you would notice that every time you pick up one of these things and stick them in the appropriate slot, a new room would be added to the level, and that's your progression. I, however, am not the kind of person who keeps an eye on the map, because I've never really needed one in any of these games, so it took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize new rooms were being added, since many of these rooms look identical to all the other rooms sans enemy placement. Once I understood what was happening, it wasn't so bad, though I still had to double check I was heading in the right direction because again, they all look identical. Actually, that level just kind of sucks in general, since it also has this room with all these floaty teleportation balls? I don't know. If you get hit by them, they teleport you to an arena where you have to kill all the enemies before you're reset to the beginning of the room. This room is terrible, and the only advice I can give you is to try to get up onto the balcony and carefully time your dodges, since you can roll through them. The boss of this level is one of the few that I actually like, at least aesthetically, but he also has a weird gimmick. He'll split off into 3 different heads to attack you, and for some reason 2 of the heads are invulnerable, but the one that shoots ice was always vulnerable to damage both times I fought him. So try to maintain your lock on that one as long as you can to deal some extra damage. Dante's rocket launcher does the trick, and Lucia, just use the knives, they're her best ranged weapon. The last thing I'll mention is that after you beat the game, you'll unlock the Bloody Palace mode, which just don't fucking bother. It's just the secret rooms, but there's more. It's a series of 9,999 arena battles against different configurations of enemies, and it awards you jack shit for doing it. I mean, you get an achievement, but the amount of time you'd be sinking into this awful game mode is just not worth it. You can also try to beat hard mode with both characters and their sponsored bonus costumes for the opportunity to play as Trish, but, well, there's a better game that lets you do that. So that's Devil May Cry 2. Is it the worst game I've ever played? Hell the fuck no, there's trashier stuff out there. 5 minutes on Steam will prove that. Is it disappointing? Without a doubt. But beyond just getting you caught up on Devil May Cry 5, I also wanted to call back to something I talked about in my last video. Recognizing the flaws and stumblings of games, or really anything, puts their successes into better perspective. Getting refreshed on this game was that kind of experience for me. As much as I really didn't enjoy playing this, it did make me appreciate both DMC1 and the next few games to come much more. And as much as I and many other people don't like to admit it, DMC2 did introduce a lot of things to the series that would become standard to it, and many others to come. Honest to God, air combos, alternating characters, a more robust and concise ranking system, active weapon switching, larger environments, a wider roster of bosses. Granted, it implemented none of them particularly well, but they were innovative on paper. If we're being honest though, for any other franchise, this should have been the death knell. Despite the good sales, the consumer trust was severely damaged by this game, and the title to come after it would have to be not just lightning, but a supernova in a bottle to pull the same numbers. So, with Itsuno at the helm, the Devil May Cry team sailed forward into unknown waters. It would be just over 2 years before we would see Dante again after DMC2.
Sorry, not open for business yet. I haven't even picked a name for this joint, and I'm already getting calls.
Well, that takes care of Devil May Cry 2. Thank you all for sticking with that one. I hope that this video was a little bit more negative. Okay, a lot more negative than my last one, because this game really is just not that enjoyable. It's really not worth your time. But it is, part of the franchise's history. It is a game that I think people who want to get into this series should know about. Maybe not necessarily finish, but at least play a little bit of, just so that they kind of know why people don't like it. That being said, I don't generally actually like to harp on video games too much. I have a lot more fun talking about things that I like about games than I do about things that I don't. I'm really looking forward to doing the DMC3 video because DMC3 is, in my opinion, the best one, so I will have a lot of good things to say about it, and it will just generally be a good time, I think. So look forward to that one. I'm absolutely ecstatic to have an excuse to play DMC3 again, but thank you for watching this one. If you enjoyed it, if it made you laugh, if it made you want to at least give this game maybe 20 or 30 minutes of your time, then go ahead and, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new, go ahead and ring that bell so that you can see when the DMC3 video hits. I'm really excited to be making YouTube videos in general. This has been a really fun experience for me. It's nice to have a ongoing creative project, even if it's not super serious. So I'm having a good time. For all of you that have already subscribed, who watched my first video, gave it a like, left comments, thank you very much. I was extremely excited to see anyone enjoying that video. As I mentioned in my last video at the end, I do have a Twitter and a Tumblr and that sort of stuff to, if you're curious about where I am working on the next video. I do occasionally post updates, you know, letting people know when I have a script done, when I'm starting to record, when I'm starting editing, stuff like that. So if you want to keep up, if you want to know where I am on the next video, go ahead and follow me there. Links will be down in the description because I'm not cool enough to have links in the actual video yet. Had to learn that one when I posted the first video. So go ahead and follow me there, and intermingled between my shit posting, you will find updates on whatever video I happen to be working on at the time. So I will hopefully see you there. Don't be afraid to drop me a message or anything, but I hope to see you guys around there. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope to see you on the next one, and I will catch you guys next time.